Flintstone, you're fired! You're fired! God! I love having bad days.
Hello and welcome to the Takes Dome. This will be different than my half-hour video essays, shorter videos that are more extemporaneous and based on ideas too half-baked for a full video. I'm left below. The bad boss has undergone a change in pop culture over the years. The classic TV cartoons, the Flintstones and the Jetsons, had Mr. Slate and Mr. Spacely, who were both versions of this, Spacely more so than Slate. He was overbearing, short-tempered, and greedy. He could be the villain of the plot at times, but at other times could be a neutral or even a benevolent force. Bosses of Spacely's breed were competent at running their businesses, usually, though. They were the kind of boss who could at least attempt to justify their place in the hierarchy, and whose flaws were self-imposed, becoming bullies who lost touch with their employees. Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, though 20 years on past those two, still fit in that mold, the way much of The Simpsons is a broad-stroke adaptation of those earlier animated sitcoms. Of course, he's much more over-the-top in his supervillainy and a more pointed social commentary on class inequality, but he's good at his job when he needs to be, and can be reasoned with. But alongside Mr. Burns, you had the advent of Dilbert, and boy, is it topical to be talking about Dilbert right now. There's a whole video essay in there somewhere about Scott Adams becoming the monster that he parodied somewhere. And the pointy-haired boss, a different trope for a different kind of bad boss. The pointy-haired boss stood for the malaise of the 90s office world, the kind of manager who's only good at getting and keeping his job, but not actually doing it. Oftentimes malicious, but in a very vapid way, rather than the overbearing wrath of Burns or Spacely. The pointy-haired boss represented the nonsense of everyday office life, a preening middle management that existed only to justify their own salaries, and if anything actively got in the way of work getting done. Two different flavors of bad boss, the competent bully or the incompetent suck-up, but neither of them really fit for the present moment, which brings me back to this video's topic, Elon Musk. I mean, the man needs no introduction. He was in Iron Man, he was on The Simpsons, he was in Rick and Morty, in the latter two getting a very soft portrayal for shows that can really usually bite with satire. There were definitely smudges on his, record, mostly related to his Twitter habits, like when he very randomly called a professional diver dumb guy in a tweet thread regarding swimmers trapped in a flooded cave in Thailand. But then all genius is a little eccentric, right? Well, that very Twitter habit took hold. In a bizarre chain of events possibly related to an attempted pump and dump of Twitter stock on Musk's part in his own bravado, he was roped into buying Twitter out wholesale. It was one of those golden parachute moments you see a lot in business for Twitter's old management anyway, especially because they had only ever been able to kind of barely get the company to profitability. For the company to be sold wholesale and taken private meant that they could wash their hands of the problem forever, never needing to worry about making real money off the company, and just being able to purely cash out even of their stock. The question of Twitter making money is important here because this couldn't just be a vanity project for Musk. If he wanted it to make money, he couldn't just leave it as it was. But he had to really bring his A game, refine the best of the company and streamline underperforming parts. But the genius of reusable rockets and mass-market electric cars could handle that, right? One thread you can pick up on from all this bad news about Twitter is not just that Musk is bad at this, though he very much is, but really how much he seems to enjoy taking an axe to his own company, stripping it down to the barest of bones that'll still allow it to function, for now. This is really a new breed of bad boss. He has the bullying and random "you're fireds" of a Mr. Spacely, and the vapid incompetence of a pointy-haired boss, yes. Both of these old stereotypes could be understood by self-motivation. Spacely in looking out for the bottom line of the company as a whole, and the pointy-haired boss looking out for his own rung on the ladder, regardless of everything else. But why would Musk want to harm the company that he spent so much money on? The answer I arrive at goes back a few years. I had an idea for this video early in Musk's tenure at Twitter, but I wasn't the first one to make the observation. Elon Musk is paranoid. His bizarre behavior at Twitter, like having bodyguards who follow him around the Twitter SF headquarters, even in the bathroom, or claiming in summer 2018 that an employee was trying to sabotage Tesla. The author of a 2018 book titled Insane Mode described Musk's position as that of a wartime CEO, somebody who had to look over his shoulder for threats from every sector: conventional car manufacturers, regulators, foreign electric car makers, and more. And that's where this video's clickbait premise comes in, because the combination of paranoia and power is destructive in a pretty unique way. I remember learning about Stalin back in college, and it fascinated me just how much he insisted on stepping on his own feet. The purges and the gulags weren't just for undesirables, the way, anyone would understand that term. Sure, there were people in there who were opposed to the Soviet project, or who were from vulnerable minorities that get targeted in the same reason that, any dictatorship targets certain groups of people. Those purges went further. Stalin's Great Purge happened between 1936 and 1938, with the first targets being Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev, who were seen as part of a faction with Stalin's hated rival Leon Trotsky, from among older Bolsheviks left over from the revolution and from Lenin's period. Because you see, while the Soviet Union always had a front man, informally called Premier and usually holding multiple internal titles, at the top of the Soviet system the power was technically equally shared by the members of the Politburo, a small group basically like the cabinet. Again, they were technically equal, even though one leader was usually dominant, but that meant the atmosphere was always rife with conspiracy because Politburo members could use legal maneuvers to try and seize power. Think a corporate board meeting crossed with a Song of Ice and Fire, and you get the gist of it. This was why the old Bolsheviks, many of whom had held rank on the Politburo at least previously, were prime suspects whether they were really opposed to Stalin or not, because either currently or at some point they had held equal title to him. A trial in 1937 marked the purges moving on, though, to the Red Army, and historians are baffled at the motives. Those Red Army purges were some of the most destructive to Soviet rule. The hollowing out of the officer corps was a direct contributor to the Soviet Union losing 100,000 men in the Winter War with Finland right before World War II, and then doing just so terribly in the first year of the Axis invasion during the war. These were people that Stalin needed to keep the whole enterprise going, and he had them either exiled, demoted, or killed. The most famous example from how the purges went after everyone, though, is in this photo. This photo is decently famous. It's used today on the TV Tropes page for unpersoning, but the context is even crazier. In researching this video, I was shocked to learn that the airbrushed out guy is Nikolai Yezhov, who's one of the leaders of the NKVD during the purges. So one of the secret police leaders, and he got purged. It was the one arm of the Soviet state that Stalin could rely on the most for his power. And when they were no longer of any use, he tried to make it as if that guy had never even existed. How's that for loyalty? Now, there isn't one answer for why Stalin was the way he was, but the answer I like best is that it was about power. In 1922, under Lenin's leadership, Stalin became the general secretary of the Communist Party, and the word secretary there should be emphasized. It was an important role at the time, but seen as a supporting role, and his rivals even mocked him as comrade card counter. But Stalin realized that the party's rules meant that the general secretary could control membership of the party, and when the party was the state, that meant that he could control everything. And that quest for control by determining who was in and who was out dictated all of his atrocities afterwards. Everything from purging his actual enemies and actual anti-Soviet subversives to purging loyal soldiers and loyal secret police, was meant to make sure that nobody could rely on anyone in the USSR. Nobody could rely on anyone else in the system. Only Stalin would be a stable point around which the entire system would revolve. The purges then were for anyone who got too comfortable, too powerful in their own right. I see this kind of habit in Musk's Twitter 2.0. A recent article on the website Ars Technica describes it. It was natural for Musk to fire Twitter's senior leadership right after he took over. Like, that's kind of typical for major corporate takeovers, but his purges of the old Twitter ranks went down and down. Per the article, Musk's decision to bring a rotating cast of leaders from his wider business empire to his so-called Twitter 2.0 comes down to a deep distrust towards its previous leadership, and paranoia that disgruntled staffers might try to sabotage the business. This phantom fear of sabotage is just like the fear he's expressed before at Tesla. But then his petty and mean-spirited behavior, like his treatment of that Icelandic employee over that employee's disability, his random changes in direction for the company and money-making ideas, don't really give his employees much leeway to trust him. And that discontent that he creates by his paranoid actions gives him excuse to be more paranoid. And just like Stalin and Nikolai Yezhov, there's the example of Esther Crawford. She was one of the most gung-ho Twitter 2.0 advocates. She famously posted about sleeping at the Twitter headquarters. Despite that, she was a pre-Musk Twitter manager, so she had to go. Now, he claims that the massive cuts are to save money, and there's truth to that in purchasing the company he weighted down with a tremendous amount of debt. But they're a convenient way to remove any institutional force inside Twitter, anyone that can be relied upon for guidance or direction within the company other than himself. In that kind of environment, it's easy to see how he'd end up like Stalin. He doesn't see the success of Twitter as his goal, not really. Elon Musk's goal at Twitter is to dominate Twitter's corporate culture and vision, no matter the cost to the company's bottom line, the quality of the product, or even the survival of the company. Just like Stalin exacted massive harm on the Soviet Union just to further entrench his personal power. Elon Musk's brand of egomania and self-destructive, stupid evil already has a great pop culture send-up in Glass Onion's Miles Braun. And that could be a model for a new template of bad boss. Somebody who drafts off the genius of others while mercilessly destroying anyone he thinks will get in his way, even if it means hurting his own company. The Elon Musk Miles Braun figure is the dictator boss. Thank you all for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below about this half-baked idea of mine. Ideally, these will work as schedule fodder for the almighty algorithm to fill in between bigger videos going forward. Thanks again.